Let's take a look at what the difference is between the CV and the EP curve tool. Internally, both tools create just the same NURBS curve, just the way how they do it is different. For example, the CV curve places your control vertices, and then, as the icon suggests, it creates the curve inside, and the EP curve tool positions your edit points, and then your curve will flow through those edit points. Let's start with the CV curve tool. And before we do this, I can double click it, and then you see, for example, the curve degree. The curve degree is actually very important to keep in mind. With the curve degree, this basically means that after my initial click, I can place 3 control vertices before then a curve is created. So here I have my curve start, first, second, and third point, and then there's my curve. So let's take a look at what we have here. So we have 4 vertices, and if I select this curve, go to control panel, you will see it is a degree 3. It has 1 span. And what does 1 span actually mean? Well, if I turn off the CV and hull, you will see that this curve has 2 red dots. Those are my edit points, so the start and end. And between 2 edit points, that white line, that is actually a span. If I now, for example, say, well, I would like to have 2 spans, you will see now that here I have the same curve with 2 spans, or 3 spans, or 4 spans. But it's all basically the same curve. It has the same flow. Now, for example, what happens if we have a level 1? Well, I could click, 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 and click, and you don't really see a curve. Well, the reason for that is a level 1 degree basically means that it is linear, so you only have lines, you do not get curves. And as you can see, every time where I clicked and positioned a CV, we also have an edit point. So there are no CVs between the edit points, which is why from one edit point to the next edit point, we just get a line, in contrast to our first curve where we have between 2 edit points, a blue curve. Now if we go to a degree 2, we can, for example, position 2 points before we get a curve. And the main reason for the degrees is basically your curve quality. You see, for example, in this case here with a degree 2, it's very easy to create this arc, because all I need to do is to find a start and an end, and then actually one point where, for example, my curve should flow to. And then I only have one control vertice to move to the side, or to build basically maybe an even arc between those 2 edit points, or maybe kind of like a shape like this. And here in this case, for example, I have 2 control vertices, and that actually already makes it a little bit more complicated to create a curve that is nice and even, because here it gets a little bit flatter. But that's actually, for example, also maybe something I could take to my advantage. Well, let's say I would like to create a curve that starts more vertical, then becomes flat, and then goes vertical more down. So I could, for example, go to a degree 5 curve. And then here I start putting down my control vertices. I'm using the grid to snap. And there you see that the horizontal part and the vertical parts are a little bit more linear. And overall, that curve gets a more boxy look. So think about the CVs kind of like as extra control points with which you could try to influence your curve. And maybe let's try out one with a degree 7. This case, for example, it is a little bit more increased. So there you can see that the sides look even more flatter, and this corner is not as super round as here. It gets a little bit more pinchy. So that's basically what you can do with different control vertices and then one span. However, if I, for example, quickly go back to a degree 3 and I create a shape like this, you see now that I have 3 basically spans because I have, let me turn off the CV, 1, 2, 3, and 4 edit points. So it means between I have, as you can see, 3 spans. So if I maybe for a moment go to the EP tool, what the edit point basically means, you decide a point where your curve should flow through. So the difference with the CV tool is where I position kind of like outside control vertices, and then the curve is somewhat projected inside this linear cage. With the EP tool, I position points my curve should flow through. And sometimes the EP curve can be a really nice tool to kind of like quickly sketch out maybe the outline of an organic looking shape. And the EP tool, for example, allows you to select the edit points on a curve. And then, for example, we can move those, and you see that the control vertices are updated automatically. And based on how I'm going to move one edit point, the neighbor curve or the neighbor span, so this span here will be updated because this curve has to flow through the different edit points into here. I can actually also go in and, for example, select a CV and then change this maybe to something like this. However, if I go back and select this edit point and then move it, the moment I click, you will see everything is being reset, because when I move my edit points, Alias then again tries to draw a curve starting from one CV, from one edit point to the next, to the next, to the next, and then it has to reposition your CVs. So when do you use which one? For example, let's say I have to make a line, just a line, a degree 3. By hand, it's really difficult with the CV tool to position all my CVs so they are on a nice ray. In that case, for example, it is much easier to use the EP tool and then start my and place my 2 edit points. In this way, indicate my start and my end of my line. And then my control vertices are perfectly positioned in between. If I would like to create a nice arc, however, then maybe I might rather want to go in and use my CV tool and then position my CV points on my own, because as you can also see, my curve starts nicely here and then the curve ends nicely in this edit point. If I go with my EP curve, let's say I start here and place a point there and then place a point there, you will see that my EP curve actually does not match my CV curve. And my EP curve kind of like bends over. Here it's below. So it's not really a very usable idea. Maybe I could change the position of my edit point, trying to match it. And as you see, it's actually nearly not possible. So in general, actually, the EP curve is, in my opinion, very useful if you quickly want to position a line and have your CVs in between. But otherwise, I would always advise to use the CV curve tool and always try to work only with one span. And then if you need more curvature control, simply change the degree of a curve. You can also afterwards, let's say here I now would like to change this curve a little bit, go ahead and change the degree. Of course, going down will change the look and feel of that curve, but if I increase my degree, you will see that alias is just repositioning the CVs so that it recreates exactly that curve for you. And then if you click accept, you have that curve recreated. So instead of trying to place all these points by hand, you could just sketch it out with a degree 3 and then increase the degrees through the control panel. And then maybe here we could go in and maybe change this a little bit. So this way, for example, now I have a curve which is nice and flat, and then it has a little bit of speed and then stops, for example, at the last edit point. And the reason for why you should not use an EP curve with multiple spans or a CV curve with multiple spans is because of the curvature control. So let's take a look at what we have here. Here on top, we basically have single span curves with a different set of degrees, a degree 3 or 5. And below here, we have degree 3 curves, but with multiple spans. Properly on your first look, the curves look pretty much the same, nice and smooth. Well, let's turn off the CV hull. And everything looks okay, but your eye can easily be fooled. So, because NURBS curves are based on math, we can actually try to analyze these curves. So if you go to locators, you have something called Curvature Control. And if I click those curves, you will see the curvature graph. And then with the move locator, we can left mouse button scale it, and then middle mouse button change the resolution. And basically what this tool is telling you is how much, for example, a curve bends or accelerates. For example, this part is pretty flat and then it starts bending more, which is why then those greenish lines actually becoming longer. Here you see the same. This corner, it arcs, or the curve bends more and then it becomes flatter. Here becomes flatter, which is then again why those lines become shorter. And then the magenta line outside basically gives you an idea about the curvature graph. Here, different example, you see the corners. So this tells you how much it's actually arced at the beginning, and then how flat it gets, and then how the curve starts to bend again. And it also tells you how quickly or how slowly, for example, a curve starts to bend. For example, here you see this line is very smooth and then slowly turns into the curve that goes down. So let's select maybe this curve and turn on the edit point. And let's move this one. And there you can see that maybe this way I could change a little bit how quickly this curve starts to change its curvature. This, for example, right now is nearly a really nice transition. So it starts very slowly, and then the more it goes to the left, the stronger but more gradually the bend becomes. Well, let's take a look at those curves, and let's turn on the curve locator, and let's increase the resolution. And maybe what you notice is that every time where we have an edit point, we have actually a small kink inside that magenta line. And that basically tells you that at this edit point, so there and there and there, for your eye, the curves flow nicely together. However, mathematically, there's kind of like a small break in the surface tension. And that is something that could later be transferred into your computer model or the surface. For example, if you blend between different surfaces, or if you create a curve, how nicely the curve makes a transition. And that is something you want to avoid, because you will be able to probably feel that, or on the highlight see that. And that's basically the main reason why, for example, edit points on curves is something you want to try to prevent. So try to work with single span curves and then play with the different level of degrees so you can create the shape you need with a single span curve.